Good morning, Transplant Helper community. My name is Jim Merle, and today I want to pause for just a few moments and answer what tends to be a pretty common viewer's question. I've answered it a couple of different ways at a couple of different occasions, but today I want to add a little bit to that, and that is, how do we go about getting charity care / financial assistance from our transplant centers, hospitals, doctors, whatever, in order to help with these bills. Now, you know as well as I do that the price of transplant can be somewhat overwhelming. It doesn't matter if you're independently wealthy, you've just had a wonderful career, you've been able to stack money away in the bank, investments, whatever. At the end of the day, when you get to paying bills such as the millions of dollars worth of bills that could possibly be owed to your transplant center, that tends to drain us dry pretty quickly. Now, even if you happen to have good medical insurance, which covers, like most do in the United States, maybe kind of an 80-20 type thing, or maybe having a deductible, and then after that it takes over paying 100%, it can still get pretty expensive. And even aside from that, if you could take care of the bills as far as hospital bills, bills for the surgery, bills for the hospital stay, equipment, that sort of thing, when it comes down to it at the end of the day, you're still going to be left with medications to pay for a lifetime, that sort of thing. And so you really have to be looking and especially thinking ahead in order to make sure that your life is going to be possible in the future. And it's sad to think about it that way, but that is the absolute truth. So many times people turn to different directions to try to take care of this. First, they do turn to their insurance, which is the way to go in the beginning. Other times people turn to fundraisers, they turn to, cash options, that sort of thing, which, eventually are going to run dry as well. But then finally, I think one of the better ways to turn is by reaching out to your transplant center, your hospitals, for charity care type financial assistance programs. Now, in the beginning of that, people immediately say, wait a minute, I make more money than that, or I have more investments than that, or more assets than that. I'm not going to qualify. That's for the indigent, those who cannot pay, and for the poor. Well, in general, you might say that's the case. However, you need to be keeping in mind that you as a transplant patient, you're going to become poor if you're trying to pay your bills out of pocket, or if you're trying to spend too much of the balance of your budget, your income, on medical bills. Eventually you're going to run short on something else. And I'm one of those guys. I've certainly been there, and I'm currently doing that. You have to make some life choices sometimes. Do you want food on your table, a roof over your head, your power and water turned on in your home? Or do you want to pay this doctor bill? Well, it's sad that it has to come to that, but that's what it has to come to sometime. So a good budget, a good balance is what you're going to have. Now, there are basically 3 tips I give when those hospital bills start pouring in, which I've shared with you in the past. I just want to repeat them in passing today and emphasize the last one, and that is, number 1, don't panic. When those bills start flooding the mailbox, when they start coming in, when those collectors start calling, maybe not technically debt collectors, say from an outside source, but when the hospitals, the doctors start calling, don't panic, okay? This is not an unget-overable and impossible situation. It is definitely doable, and I know a number of people that are X amount of years out of transplant, and they look back now and they say, because of this help, because of this assistance, because of this insurance program or that, I'm now debt-free, okay? So it is possible to get to that place, just don't panic. In the second place, I always tell people right out of the gate, don't pay. And what I mean by that is not the fact that you're not ever going to pay your bills. We're good, moral people. We have, morals about us. And so we're certainly going to want to pay our bills eventually. But I do remind everybody, just because a bill comes in the door doesn't mean you need to stop and immediately write a check for that, okay? That's a bad idea, because a lot of times, more times than not even, some of those bills, either they weren't coded properly at your center, at your hospital, so the insurance company may have kicked some of that out. In other cases, it may be that they've done a wonderful job at getting it prepared and coded for the insurance company, but for whatever reason, they just haven't paid yet. Now, that's not to say they're going to pay 100% in the end anyway, but maybe they just haven't paid yet. And so you need to be sure that whatever is going to be paid out by your insurance company is kind of already been taken care of and pretty much passed before you go to writing those checks, okay? So don't panic, don't pay, And the third one here is where today's discussion falls in even more, and that is don't be too proud, okay? Don't be too proud to ask for assistance. And of course, some of that comes out in fundraisers like, events, different 5K walks. Sometimes those types of things are done, different t-shirt sales, or, it could be anything. There are various ways to raise funds. I've even talked about the possibility of using GoFundMe a few weeks ago. I'll link that up here in the corners as well as in the description below. You can go check that out. But what I'm talking about here is really don't be too proud to ask for, as I've already stated a couple of times, for that financial assistance from your center, from your hospital, from your doctor's office, whatever. And the real key to getting that, when it comes down to it, has nothing really to do with, say, your overall income. You may have an income, and I'm making up a number. Please understand this is only for example. You may have a household income of, say, $65,000. And you look at that and you say, well, that's above poverty level for my area, so I probably won't qualify for these programs. Well, that may not be the case because, again, you have abnormally high medical expenses, abnormally or enormously sometimes higher medical expenses than the average person. So yeah, you may not qualify for general welfare, things like food stamps, that sort of thing. You may not qualify for SSI benefits, even through the Medicare and the Social Security Disability Program, but you just may qualify for that financial assistance at your transplant center, because what you're going to be submitting to them is going to vary from transplant center to another, but it basically comes down to not only showing your income and your assets, but then in turn proving what your expenses are. And that's really where this thing balances, okay? Your income may be higher, you may have some assets, but if your expenses somehow well outdo that, and they can see, and sometimes these people are pretty kind, okay? They're people just like you, and they can say, okay, they're going to be having a difficult time buying food, putting clothes on the backs of their family members, putting a roof over their head, or maintaining that, if we're taking all their money, okay? So they're going to look at all of that. They're going to balance that, and they're going to make a decision on whether or not you might receive some financial assistance, some charity type assistance, whatever. And that assistance can come out in several forms. Probably mainly it's going to come out in discounts. It's going to say, okay, you had a $100,000 bill, we're going to discount that down to say $60,000, okay? So it can come out that way, surely. But in addition to that, it can also come out in really more or less just a writing off of the bill. And by the way, that's a lot of what these financial assistance programs are really about in the back room of this. It's about the hospitals, the doctors writing off some of these bills and not holding you accountable for those balances in the end. But again, many of those charity care programs can give incremental discounts and say, okay, we're going to knock it down 60% of the bill, and then you start making payments on that. If that's what they do, hey, if that's the best you can do, go for that. But there are other times, and I've been there and done this, okay, trust me on this, there are other times when your transplant centers go ahead and sign you up, and you put in the application, you qualify, and they give you what's known as 100% financial assistance through charity care. And what that means is pretty much all the balances, everything that's left after the insurance company pays, whatever, they're going to wipe your slate clean, okay? Now you're going to be able to go without those bills, and you look behind you and everything's just cleaned up. And I've had that for a number of years post-transplant, and it was pretty, I don't know what you call it other than pretty satisfying to know that if a bill ever did slip through and get into my mailbox, I could pull it out, make a phone call, and say, hey, I just want to remind you, I'm on charity care. That was the name of UAB's system. I'm on charity care. And they say, oh, Mr. Merle, I'm so sorry. Just forget about it. Throw that away. We'll take care of it. And they would wipe my slate clean. And the better part of that is that while they did that, those programs, at least their program, was retroactive. And I don't know if that's exactly the right word, but what that meant was it went back in time, okay? So if I applied for charity care, say in January of any given year, if I apply for that in January, anything that was up to 6 months older than that, so back around to June, July-ish, anything back up 6 months older than that, they backed up and paid that too. So not only did I have no bills coming forward, and my current bills were being paid, but any bills that were up to 6 months old were being paid retroactively. And that was a huge blessing, because I can remember the very first time I applied and received a charity care type financial assistance program. I just got an ICD implanted right here, a pacemaker defibrillator. That thing cost over $100,000, and it was a done deal. It was implanted. I was living with it, and then I found out about financial assistance after some of the bills started coming in. I started to panic, which again I advise you not to do. I found out about financial assistance programs, filed for that, qualified for that, and that they almost surprised me by saying, "Oh, what? By the way, Mr. Merle, that ICD you had 3 months ago, don't worry about it. That's taken care of. And the doctor visits you have, clinic visits you have next week, don't worry about it. It'll be taken care of." Wow, that was a burden lifted off of my shoulders, a tremendous burden. It's like an elephant jumped off my back, And that's the way it can be. But the key to these programs come down to a couple of main things. One, I've already mentioned, comes down to budget, okay? Yes, it comes down to income at a point. Yes, it comes down to assets at a point, but it also really comes down to budget. What kind of budget are you showing them on paper, in writing, where you sit down and decide, okay, I'm paying my bills that I can, I'm paying these medical bills, and here's how things are thrown out of kilter and they're out of balance. That's going to help. And then another big thing that helps, and listen to me carefully, because I've talked not only with my transplant center about their financial program, some of the social workers and such, I've actually called some other transplant centers in my area, such as Emory Hospital in Atlanta. I've been in touch with the University of Mississippi in Mississippi, which at one time I was actually under their care, so I knew some of those people anyway. But I gave them a call and just, generally and vaguely asked some questions, such as how do you apply for your program? And then in turn asked them, what would possibly disqualify someone for your program? And the number one thing I heard over and over was not a person has too much income or too much assets. That can happen. But what I really heard was, by all three of those programs I talked to, universally, they said not completing the application properly is what disqualifies people or has people to be rejected more than anything. So as I really talked in depth to my transplant center about that on a personal, face-to-face, hey, let's talk like human basis, off the if you will, off the record, they told me, said, Jim, it's pretty simple. If you fill out the application, if you bring in or turn in all the documents that are necessary, which sometimes are hard to gather. I mean, we're talking about budgets, which we may or may not already have, but detailed budgets. We're talking about letters being written from your doctor explaining why you might need that assistance, why you're not currently working or something, or that sort of thing. We're talking about copies of last year's income taxes, that sort of thing, so they can really prove what it's been like for the last year or so. We're talking about going back and gathering, prescription drug list from your pharmacies to prove that you're on all these medications and here's what the costs are. We're talking about gathering up bills, literal bills sometimes, saying, look, I can't help it. Here's what my power bill is in my area. Or here's what my house payment is in this area. And just sharing with them really sometimes some personal information, but getting them the completed application with the proper documents is the key to even getting considered. You see, if you fail to turn in any of those documents, your application just keeps getting tossed aside until eventually it slides off someone's desk into the trash. Maybe not literally, but that's about how it works. So you've got to turn in these documents. You've got to get them the paperwork. And again, they tell me across the board, that's pretty much the clearinghouse. They've got so many people applying. Let's use an example, and this is definitely not little, but say they got 1,000 people applying. If 800 of those people don't turn in the proper documents, it's easy to tell you up front there'll be no more than 200 people approved, because the other 800 didn't even have the proper document. You got to get that turned in, okay? So be careful, be cautious, be sure that everything they ask for, you do it. And if they look it over like they have with my application before and say, okay, we got all this, this, and this, but we still need that, you're going to want to pull your hair out, okay? It's going to get frustrating, but get them what they want. That's your best bet. And being kind during the process, I don't believe that hurts, okay? And you can get these programs, because again, financial assistance programs, charity care type programs, are going to be your best bet for paying these bills. And again, I hope this has helped you out in some way. If it has, how about go ahead and give me a big thumbs up. Encourage me a little bit to continue to make videos like this. If you've got any comments or suggestions concerning how you went about kind of taking care of some of your bills or getting past some of these bills, please leave them in the comments below. That's not just for me, that's for the entire Transplant Helper community, because we often learn the most from one another, and I know I learn a ton from you as you leave those comments. So just comment below, how are you taking care of your bills? How are they being taken care of? Whatever that is, and you know, just talk about it. That's the best thing we can do in this situation, is just talk about it. Again, I hope this has helped you out. If it has, share it with a friend and be willing to go ahead and hit that big subscribe button. That would be absolutely great, because I want to keep providing you with content that'll help you to live the life of a transplant patient better. And I hope that you'll consider doing one thing for me right now, and that is please stay stronger, friends.